Thanks very much. I don't usually come up to the front and speak in events or always come to events, but I'm really happy to be able to be here tonight. I bet in this crowd, folks probably have an idea about the Spanish Civil War and its origins. Folks also familiar with the folks from the Abraham Lincoln Brigades, the American volunteers who went to serve and volunteered to fight against fascism in the late 30s, and this was before World War II. Our speaker tonight is a winner of a prize which the Puffin Foundation, as well as the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, have collaborated on to honor champions of human and civil rights here in America and also internationally. And is that Dennis, with the light shining in my ear? And we're lucky to have the Deputy Director of ALBA here as well, Dennis Mimi this evening. And, you know, those vets they were called premature fascists, and they went to fight Franco, who was aided by Hitler's Luftwaffe and by Mussolini, and they were fighting for certain types of freedoms and against a type of fascism which was intolerant based on religion, was certainly misogynistic and sexist. We could talk about Hitler and Mussolini as well, and eugenics, and we can talk about fascism, but it's, I think, only fitting in some ways that the person that we're going to hear from tonight and one of the organizations that we chose to honor this year deals with the rising tides of either anti-Semitism and racism and hatred that we face in our own country today. We've given this prize to Brian Stevenson, great champion of civil rights. Indigenous Women Rising received the prize this year, and it was last year, I think, Patrick, right? Not 2 years. COVID is all a blur to me, like they have to hate, and Patrick were the winners of the prize. So I just wanted to put it in context a little bit. Wanted to welcome everybody here. It's wonderful to see you, and I don't need to speak anymore, but bring Patrick up.
Now, the folks from Puffin are asking me to take off my mask so they can hear us better online. So is everybody okay with that? Yeah. I have to ask the questions now. About 2 years ago, my family and I, we moved from New Jersey down to South Carolina. And I will just say their feelings about COVID are quite different than they were here in New Jersey. I thank you for giving me the time this evening and for all of you coming out on a rainy Saturday. This is a topic that some people don't feel comfortable listening to. And I say that in that next week I was scheduled to give a speech very similar to this in Illinois. And there were some groups that favor red baseball caps who decided to have me canceled because it was a conversation that their community was not prepared to have. So I thank you all for being as open-minded as you are in having these discussions. I often share that hate is an incredibly powerful emotion, both for the bad, which we're all familiar with, and we can talk about that for hours and hours, but also for the good. And I say that in that we can look at the bad during World War II, obviously, and looking at what Hitler and the Third Reich did to millions and millions of people. We can also, though, look at how the free world responded to it. How we as a civil society decided there are things we will not accept. There are things we will stand up for. There are things that we believe. There are things we will fight for. There are things we will die for. And I think that becomes very important as we begin to have these conversations about the violent far right and how we address these issues. And let me be very clear. When I talk about violent far-right extremism, I'm not talking about those individuals that are sending you emails that are linking to an article on foxnews.com. I'm not even talking about those who are necessarily sending you an article or telling you to listen to something before you get together for Thanksgiving dinner that they saw on 8chan or 4chan, which, quite frankly, are some horrific websites. We are talking about those individuals who not only share a hateful ideology, but are actually taking violent steps to try to enforce it, to try to make clear that their views are the only views that matter. And this becomes a very complicated process when we think about it. You know, we would like to believe that this is relatively easy. We would like to believe that we can spot someone, they're walking down the street, and yes, clearly they are a violent far-right extremist. And I don't know how many of you have seen the movie American History X back in the late 90s. There we tell a story. It's very easy to tell who the villains are. They have shaved heads. They have tattoos. They're wearing combat boots. Very simple to know. Those are the violent extremists. Those are the ones we have to be warned about. Those are the ones we have to cross the street if we see them. Well, I'll tell you today, unfortunately, that it's not that easy. Yes, we know that if you look at every violent far-right extremist group here in the United States, doesn't matter if they are the large ones that you've heard of, if they're groups like Aryan Nation, they're groups like the Proud Boys and such, or if it's the small ones. And let me tell you, we have a vast number of small ones that have 10, 15, 20 members that you've never heard of that are out training up in the mountains in Georgia. It doesn't matter the size of the group, but we know one thing is true. One, every one of those groups is rooted both in anti-Semitism, and every one of those groups is rooted in misogyny. That we know. But unlike the vision we had in the 1980s, we also know that not every group is rooted necessarily in being anti-black. In fact, what we have today, when we look at violent extremist groups in the United States, is we have a choose-your-own-adventure. We have a salad bar that one can look at to understand that if you want to hate, if you want to blame someone for the problems in society today, we have a flavor of hate for you. So you can be anti-black, you can be anti-Semitic, you can be anti-woman, you can be anti-LGBTQ+, you can be anti-immigrant, you can be anti-undocumented immigrant, you can be anti-Muslim, you can be anti-Islam, you can be anti-government. The flavors keep going and going because we've made it very easy that if someone wants to hate, there is a group that will welcome you with open arms. And it becomes important as we have these discussions to realize that when we look at these groups, often members are joining these organizations not because of the ideology, but because of other issues. You look at the data, we've spent a lot of time at Life After Hate going through our client list, understanding who we're serving. And I'll be very, to give you a quick explanation. So Life After Hate is an organization that works across the country in helping individuals disengage and de-radicalize from violent far-right extremist movements and online hate speeches. That means we are literally taking those individuals who are committing the hate crimes we all fear most, those who are worried about going to prison, those who are coming out of prison and going on parole. How do we help them lead productive, positive lives? And so we look at our clients. We've served thousands over the last 12 years that we've helped put on a positive path. We look at where they come from. We look at how things got started. We look at the field in general, where we have a much better understanding across the country and around the world and how individuals join this. And the simple fact is, you have individuals that are not joining first because of ideology. They're joining because they feel that nobody understands them. They're joining because they feel they don't fit in. They're joining because they feel that nobody listens to them. They're joining because something has happened in their lives that was traumatic. They've lost a parent, they've lost a friend. Something has impacted them, and they're feeling disconnected from society. And so then what happens? Well, today, I don't know how many of you might have teen boys in your families, but you can look at websites right now like Discord. You can look at websites like Twitch. Twitch is a wonderful website for those that want to show how adept they are at video gaming. It is also a tremendous resource to recruit members for the violent far right. You find young men who are disaffected, who believe the only thing they are good at today is video gaming, and their mothers don't understand it, their teachers don't understand it, their clergy don't understand it. Nobody understands it until a member, a recruiter from one of those groups finds them online, is one of the 5 people that's watching them play video games on Twitch, and all of a sudden starts encouraging them, starts telling them what a great job they're doing, how wonderful they are at playing Call of Duty, how great they are at handling their online weapons. They're leaders, they're experts. And all of a sudden they feel that somebody's finally heard them, somebody finally understands them, somebody finally believes in them. And so they begin an online relationship. They begin to talk. They're watching each other. They're playing games together. They're cheering each other on until it proceeds. And all of a sudden what you see is it moves to the next level. This is no longer about online gaming. This was about recruiting. This was about organizing. This is about bringing somebody who at this point has decided that he wants to spend his time with one of the few people in the world that he believes understands him. And he's willing to walk away from his parents. He's willing to walk away from his siblings, his teachers, his school, his church, everything that he's known, because he believes there is a new family that's ready to embrace him, a new family that understands him, that appreciates him, that welcomes him for who he is. And so he decides to join one of these movements. And then he very quickly realizes that as a part of this movement, he has no choice but to adopt the ideology. He has no choice but to parrot the language, but to be part of the group. And all of a sudden, what he once knew and what he has become merge into one. And he becomes what he is speaking. He becomes that hate. He becomes that harmful ideology. Because to him, that is the only way he can belong. That is the only way that he can exist. And he continues to thrive in that organization as long as he follows their rules. As long as he wakes up when they tell him to wake up. As long as he eats what they tell him to eat when they tell him to eat. As long as he works out the way they want. As long as he listens to the music they want him to. As long as he goes to the organizational events they want him to. He follows those orders. And let there be no mistake here, I'm using the he pronoun. And despite these organizations being some of the most misogynistic that you will ever find on earth, there are plenty of women who fall for the exact same thing, who join these organizations, who parrot the same misogynistic views that the organization has, who realize that not only are they part of this group, but has to deal with the back and forth and recognizing that one day they are put on these pedestals as being these white goddesses that all are to revere. But at the same time, they are simply to produce offspring, male offspring that are going to further the movement. These are the people that we're dealing with. And so you've now left your entire family, everything you've known you left behind to be part of this movement, to participate in this movement. And then you begin to realize that this is not what you thought it was. We've all had those moments in our lives. But for these individuals, they recognize there may be no next chapter for them. There are not a whole lot of folks that are eager to welcome back a violent extremist into civil society. It's not what we're looking for. There are some people that we believe are worthy of redemption. There are others we believe are not. At Life After Hate, we believe everybody is worthy of redemption as long as they are willing to take accountability for their actions. And so we have individuals that will begin to soften in their ideology. They will soften because they've hit rock bottom. They're getting out of prison. They're getting ready to go on parole. And they realize that if they simply go back into the life, and quite frankly, what becomes scary about this, it's that same extremist life that kept them alive in prison. But as they're leaving, they're realizing this can't keep going. There has to be an exit ramp somewhere. There are individuals that have hit rock bottom because their wife, their girlfriend are looking to leave them. They're going to take the children. They can't have that. They can't lose their children. They can't have their son taken away. There has to be an off-ramp. Or you will have individuals that will realize the ideology they've been sold, the ideology they themselves have been peddling at events, online, wherever they are, that ideology is false. They will look at this. You'll have an individual that has been spending years ranting about how all of those illegals are stealing our jobs. And then what happens, in a moment of clarity, they realize they don't know a single person who's lost a job to an undocumented immigrant. They begin to soften in their ideology, but at the same time, they wonder if they have the ability to reform. Can they repent? Can society show them the compassion that is necessary to allow them to write the next chapter of their lives? And that's where an organization like Life After Hate comes in. We try to, our motto is we practice compassion with accountability. And this is not an easy path. As I said, when you join these extremist groups, you gave up everybody and everything in your life that meant anything to you. When you are looking to exit these extremist groups, you're now being asked to give up the only family you now know. And unlike when you may have walked out on your parents or your teachers or your priest, this time, if you're looking to walk out, you could face great physical harm for doing so. And so it takes a special person. It takes someone of great strength and great courage to decide that they want to leave a life of violent extremism, that they want to try to see if they can redeem themselves, if they can find a new path. So they come to an organization like Life After Hate. And I will say, when we first started off, we were a rather simple organization. It was a group of formers, that's the term we use, former violent far-right extremists, who simply got together and would talk to each other, would talk about their own experiences, how they were able to set some of their hate aside. And they decided, well, wouldn't it be great if we had conversations with those who were thinking about leaving? We could just share what we experienced. They could hopefully learn a little something from us. And in the early years, that worked. Life After Hate's been around for about 12 years. And what happened in the middle of our lifetime was Charlottesville. We've all seen the videos of what happened in Charlottesville. We've all seen the photos of the tiki torches and the anger and the hate and the violence that hit the streets that I call my alma mater. And what ended up happening was our country was looking for answers. We could not believe that the photos and the videos that we saw of what happened in Charlottesville is who this country was going to become. So they turned to organizations like Life After Hate, hoping that maybe there was something, anything, that we could do to help. And we did our best. We persevered. We tried. We evolved. And part of that evolution is recognizing that this work is incredibly messy. This work is incredibly complicated. And the idea of simply offering peer support was insufficient. And so what we began a process several years ago of making sure that as we are walking through all of this, as we're trying to help individuals leave these hateful lives, how do we provide them the full supports that they need? That means that we have licensed psychologists that work with them. That means that we have licensed social workers that serve as their case managers. That means that they still have those peers who have literally walked in the same Doc Marten combat boots and can talk about their own experiences. All of that is essential to this work. Because at the end of the day, you need professionals. We're dealing with very complicated mental health issues. We're dealing with a lot of stuff. I mean, imagine you're sitting there and you're going through an intake session with an individual. And you're going through a series of questions because we're trying to figure out what we know and what we're working with. And you ask the question, are there any guns in your home? Because we're worried about self-harm or harm to others. We're told, no, there are no weapons in my home. Over their shoulder, you see an AR-15 hanging on the wall. How do you deal with that? That's something a trained, licensed professional has to handle. You know, we know from looking at our cases, we've looked at every single client case since 2020. And what we know is you're talking about the majority of individuals who come to us are coming to us not only with thoughts of suicidal ideation, but they are still coming with thoughts of wanting to harm others. How do you work through that? That's not something you can just do on a peer-to-peer basis. So we've had to evolve. We've had to professionalize. We've had to put standards in place. We've had to adopt ethics, which is something that is new to this space. I will tell you, we are not the only organization that does this, but this space is very much the Wild West. You have people that think they're simply going to get fortune and glory by working with violent extremists or by coming out themselves and becoming formers. And that's not the case. This is hard work. This is hard work both for the people that work for me, and this is hard work for every single individual that wants to exit violent extremism. So we look at this as an organization. We have to accept that there are a lot of challenges. We have to deal with the fact that we're going to be working with clients that sometimes may choose that this work is too hard. They don't want to exit anymore. We will work with individuals who decide that this work is so hard, they don't want to live on this planet anymore. And we have to make sure that our staff is able to handle all of that. So I can tell you, I am the first CEO of Life After Hate who is not a former violent extremist. That is not my background. I was brought in because we need this work is so necessary. It is so essential to the future of this world that we needed to make sure that we were adopting the professionalism, the ethics, the standards that are necessary. We were the first in this space in the United States. And I am very proud that we are the leaders in this space. And we are the leaders in this space because we continue to set standards. We say we will not settle for what we can't. And so we work with clients each and every day. We expect to see our clients both in terms of our social workers, their case managers, but also their peers. That happens on a regular basis. For an individual to exit violent extremism, on average, it takes 18 to 24 months. So it's not a quick process. There's no 30-day chip that you get. And I'm just talking at this point about those individuals who themselves were violent far-right extremists. I haven't talked about the other half of the population that we serve, and that's family and loved ones. We get a lot of calls. We have a lot of clients who are mothers, who are daughters, who are sisters, who are wives, who are girlfriends, who are caught up in these lives of violent far-right extremism. They may not be active themselves, but they are living it each and every day. When I often talk about the process that Life After Hate goes through and how we work with our clients, I often get the response from folks, oh, it sounds like AA, it sounds like how one deals with addiction. There are parts of that. But when you look at our work in totality, particularly our work with families and loved ones, what you see is the work is far more closely identified with the way you would work with battered spouses. That's what we are dealing with. We're dealing not just with psychological abuse, but we're dealing with physical abuse in homes. We're dealing with those people who want to believe that their friend, that their husband, that their loved one can be redeemed, but have no idea how to do it. We work with individuals who realize that they are losing a loved one to extremism, and what can they do? You can't necessarily simply say, what are you doing? That's stupid. You can't believe that. That's not the way you do it. We've all dealt with people who have challenges in their lives. You can't confront them. You have to really consider, you have to ask them, why is it you believe that? You have to understand where they're coming from so you're able to deal with it in its totality. That is what we do each and every day. And one of the reasons I'm so grateful for the support from the Puffin Foundation is because we've also realized how important public education, public engagement, and communication is to the work that we are doing. We've started doing work, and we're going to show you one in a little bit, about counter-narratives. It's very easy for us to look online and see the narrative and see the impact that hate and violence is having on this country, particularly in certain parts of society. It's very easy to see that. It often is not so easy to understand how does one extricate from that. It's very easy for us to say, this is wrong. This is not something you should do. I can't grant absolution to anybody. I can simply give them a path. I can hope that they're going to choose the right way. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to take it upon themselves. And I can't preach it away. I can't talk it away. I can't write it away, no matter how much I wish I could. And so one of the things we've realized is sometimes you just need to hear it from those who have been closest to it. And so, what we've done, as I said, is we've created a series of counter-narrative videos that you can find on YouTube that allow you to hear directly from formers, where we talk to them about why they got into these lives of violent extremism. What was the life like? And believe it or not, they'll still talk about both the positives and the negatives. You will talk to them, we'll hear from them in terms of why they decided they needed to get out. And then we'll also hear from them in terms of what life is like now that they are out. And what is that? And it's one of those, I was having a conversation with some of our formers actually yesterday. And it was a fascinating discussion because they were talking about both how freeing and paralyzing leaving the movement can be. In the sense that you've now spent this part of your life, there's been somebody who has controlled everything you do. It is the true definition of totalitarianism. You've just replaced a government with a quasi-government leader of anyone, of 10 people to 1,000. But you're used to have every moment of your life being told to you what you need to do. And when you leave, you have that freedom to decide, what is it I want to do with my life? You have that freedom, hopefully not to fear being doxxed. You have that freedom to decide where you want to live, the sort of things you want to do. But that also becomes incredibly paralyzing because you've now spent years never knowing what you wanted, always doing what the collective told you you had to do. And it can be very frightening. And we will see some formers that will leave far-right extremism and will swing the other way. You'll see some that will join Antifa because they need that structure. You'll see some that will join extreme religions because they need that structure. And so we have to work through all of that with all of our clients. And as part of this, what we did is actually about 3 weeks ago, we also launched a new podcast. It's called The Daily Former. And this is an opportunity to hear from those same voices, to hear from individuals who are still active, to hear from individuals who have left the movement, to hear from those researchers and those media reporters who work with violent extremism, what they're experiencing, to hear it in their own words. And I will reveal, my staff doesn't like it because they're waiting for others to figure this out. They're waiting for the Easter eggs to be discovered. We call it the Daily Former for a reason. Those who have ever done some of the research to understand the violent far right, there was a very powerful website that was known as the Daily Stormer. Some of the ugliest, most hateful language and calls to action that you can ever imagine. And the creator of it actually still operates it out of some country in the middle of nowhere. But he recently lost the rights to the Daily Stormer domain here in the United States because of a very ugly incident that happened. And so there is now a Muslim family in, I believe, the Pacific Northwest that owns the rights to the Daily Stormer here in the United States. But we use that intentionally because part of what we are doing is making sure that we are using similar language, that makes sure that we are using similar imagery, because we want those who are still active in the movement to see things that are familiar to them. We don't want them to be shocked into action because that doesn't work. We want them to be able to understand that we know where they're coming from, that we see what's happening to them, that we are experiencing this in a way that can benefit them, that they're not the only ones. And I think that becomes one of the most unique challenges to all of this. And that is making sure that those who are in violent extremism today recognize there is nothing unique or special about them. We've dealt with thousands of people who have done exactly what they've done. We've dealt with thousands of people who have decided to leave behind those lives. It is possible. You are not a unicorn just because you've decided you want to leave the violent far right. And I can tell you that, I don't know if I'm one of the few people that can say this these days. A third of my staff are former violent extremists, have done prison time, and are some of the most incredible folks that you could work with. And so I think at this point, I would love for you to hear from some of our formers and hear from their experiences. So we have a short video that I think Andrew has teed up. And I apologize for a little bit of the language. This is the calmest of them all. Unfortunately, even once they lose the moment, there are still some vulgarities that just don't leave one's mouth.
Before joining the movement, I was pretty broken kid. I really was looking for, purpose and belonging. And
when he gave me my first ever pair of combat boots, cherry red German Panzer boots, and they had swastikas and SS bolts in the treads. These boots were like a trophy to me at the time. So it was basically like something tangible to be able to say, okay, I belong here now.
This feeling of camaraderie and brotherhood, like you can trust these guys, they got you, you know, and that was pretty far from actual truth, but they got you. There's a whole bunch of stipulations. You know, they don't bother telling you about all that stuff.
My parents always said, okay, we'll always be there for you, so on and so forth. But the thing is, a lot of the time when I was on the streets, it was actually just me fending for myself.
You know, there were all these ideals that of, you know, like brotherhood, camaraderie, and support that the movement espoused, and love of race and all that stuff. But my actual lived experience of being in the movement was that there was just an intense amount of infighting and backstabbing and, you know, harm against each other as much or more really as we were harming people outside of our groups, you know.
It's isolative, that's what it is. These movements end up isolating people so much so, and that was it. I was on my own. It was like the loneliness was beyond anything I'd ever felt. But there was a group of people around, but imagine a whole bunch of people who were alone.
If something seems too good to be true, chances are it is. So when I talk about a movement that claims to be able to fill every emotional need of somebody, that does sound too good to be true. And the thing is, it always fell short.
You have to really look at the reality of what is going on with the group you're in, the actual personal interactions, and how people actually treat each other as opposed to what they say they should treat each other like, and what they say their ideals are.
What is your life like now?
Oh, my life's good now. I tell you what, my life's good.
You know, I just have a life that is fulfilling to me now.
There's not one person that I know who's left these movements who's like, damn it, I shouldn't have done that. If you want to go, if you want to leave, and if you need support, there's stuff there.
But it's not impossible. It's far from impossible. You can get your life back. You can. It just takes a little bit of work. And a lot of soul searching. It's hard shit, but it's worth it.
I think life after hate is a sign of hope.
That being involved in violent extremism doesn't have to be the end point of your life.
There's life on the other side. There's happiness on the other side. Hate doesn't have to consume everything in your world forever.
Life after hate means, I can say, a safe place to learn how to live again.
I share this with you not because any of these individuals are looking for your pity, not because any of these are looking for your acceptance. I share this because these are just 4 individuals who have demonstrated what is possible, who work each and every day to prove they are worthy of our trust, and they are worthy of us showing them just an ounce of compassion and believing that they can be welcomed back into our civil society. Each day, they have to work to prove themselves. They work to prove themselves to themselves. They work to prove themselves to others. They work to prove themselves to their employers, to everybody in their families, everybody that they've known, that they're not going to do, that this is the new them. This is the path they have chosen. This is not like substance abuse where you can fall off the wagon. You fall off this wagon, nobody's going to welcome you back a third time. And they know that. And they have to put in that work each and every day to show they are worthy of our compassion. And each and every day they take accountability for their pasts. And I would just leave you with the thought when you think about that. You know, I am often asked, as you can imagine, I will get requests from media, I will get requests from filmmakers, documentarians, researchers. Everybody wants to talk to a former. And quite frankly, everybody wants to talk to our active clients. Any of you in the medical profession know that's a violation of all sorts of ethical codes and laws. But I leave that aside. Everybody wants to talk to a former. Everybody wants to talk to an exiting individual. And we say no. We have other organizations that have no issues in letting individuals tell their stories, particularly when they're not ready to do so, when they haven't psychologically dealt with the issues that they have to wrestle with, that they're trying to solve. We say no. And we say no for a very simple reason. And that is, you see far too many of those who are seeking those stories are simply looking to delve into what we call trauma porn. They want individuals who are going to share with you the absolute worst moments of their lives, when they hit rock bottom, when they've done things that were so horrible and so despicable that no matter who we are, we can always say, well, at least that wasn't me. And I refuse to let our work be treated that way. They've been treated that way for far too many years. We won't do it anymore. We will tell their stories respectfully in video where they get to control that. But that becomes the important piece. And how do we tell these stories in a way? Unfortunately, it's not our objective to mass market. We're not out there recruiting individuals. We have more than enough clients that come to us wanting help. And we continue to deal with how we can grow as an organization. But we have to make sure that as we're helping these individuals move through these processes, that we're treating them with respect, that we're treating them with understanding. And I will say, just in closing, I will often get asked the question, are people like this worth our time, worth our effort, worth our money? Last month, I was down in Florida. I was keynoting a Day of Remembrance event. And I was asked that question afterward. And, it's one of those things that, I could go into all sorts of pieces and issues. And, I can quote Pope Francis and who am I to judge? That's not what I typically do. Because at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, when we look around this country, we see the things that we embrace. We see the things that make us proud. And then we see the things that make us recoil, the things that we worry about, the things that we fear. What is the cost if we don't do it? What happens if we believe there are some people in society that we just don't think are redeemable? It's not worth our time. It's better to spend it somewhere else. What happens is you drive these individuals deeper and deeper into these movements. And then we start wondering why we have the Timothy McVeigh incidents, why we have the Charlottesvilles, why we have the grocery store shootings up in Buffalo. All of those pieces. That's what, those are the things that happen when we fail to reach out, when we fail to connect, when we fail to help those individuals. So I look at this each and every day. I remind my team we are about compassion with accountability. We expect our clients to be accountable for their pasts, just as none of us want to be judged by our worst day, I don't think. We don't want to judge them by their worst day. But we are also accountable to ourselves as an organization, that we have to do right by our clients. This is our first and foremost priority, and that is what we do. Because as we have for 12 years, we do believe there is life after hate, and believe that it's more than just life. There can be a positive, productive life after a life of hate. We have to put in the work. We have to put in the effort. We have to put in the belief. We have to put in the trust. And when we do that, we can start seeing how lives are changed. Thank you. Yes?
How do you get people know about you? How do they know?
It's a great question. How do they know about us? So, those who are active in violent far-right extremism know about us. As you can imagine, we've peeled off 5,000 or so individuals from the movements over the years. They're aware of us. They don't like us very much, but they are aware of us. So if you're an individual and you're looking to get out, you know to reach out to us. And we have a process where you can reach out. You never have to give us your real name. You never have to give us any identifiers. Everything we do now is online. So you don't have to show up at an office, which allows us to deal with everybody across the country. So you can be as anonymous as you choose to be. But we also, as I said, we get a lot of friends and family. And they find us through two ways. One, they find us when there are media coverage about the work that we do. Back in December, we were on CBS Evening News for our work in dealing with anti-Semitism, for instance. Then we see a spike. We will get people who will reach out to us when an event happens. The shooting in Buffalo, we saw a spike. But we will have people that will simply go online. And it can be hard to figure out what are the right search terms to find our sorts of work. And so that then is an obligation on our part and is something that we are investing in now to make sure that whatever collection of words you come up with to try to help you or a loved one get out of these lives, you're going to find us. Yes,
One more.
please. As many as you want.
It reminds me a lot of the moon movement and deprogramming. Do you people, your organization, ever get together with some of the tactics that they use to deprogram these? Because it sounded so much like a cult movement. I mean, in a very extreme negative way, but it's very much similar.
It has those components. I think the biggest difference from some of the deprogramming, obviously, is that this is all voluntary. We are never going to force someone to go through this process. And I say that even, so we do take court-mandated cases. We will have judges who will come to us either to help somebody avoid prison time or as a condition of parole. They have to get a service like ours. They come to us. And our service is free to everybody who wants it. We don't charge a dime to anybody. And so they will come to us. And so the one thing that we require is that they have to be committed to the process. And I will say, we have had clients that we have had to let go because they were not committed to the process. We have had clients that, particularly those sometimes that come in through court mandate, that clearly don't believe this. They're going through the motions. They may even be looking to do something else. And we are one of the only organizations in this space that believes we have a mandate to report potential acts to law enforcement. And we take that very, very seriously. And if I could, I would share all sorts of stories about some of the violent actions that none of you have heard about because our team was able to play a small part in making sure they never happened. But all of that, you're right, there is part of that. And I think that's also why when you look you look at the data longitudinally, and you can see why it's you go through a process like Life After Hate, and the one thing you're going to take away is that ideologically based hate and violence is wrong. That we should not be committing violence based on somebody's race or gender or background, and that's you've taken that in. That's something you truly have walked away with. But it is why they may find some solace in joining Antifa or in joining an eco-terrorism group and those sorts of things, because there you have the sense that we're not necessarily attacking people anymore, and you can't show racism against a building. I don't know. But it's in the mind, you're looking for that same sort of thing. But you're absolutely right. I think you see that in some of the cult and anti-programming where they will swing to very organized religion as a way to deal with believing.
Absolutely.
Yes?
I was just wondering, a lot of these extremists, do they work? I always wondered, because you see them everywhere.
Do they work? Yes. But both those who are active violent extremists as well as those who are formers do indeed work. What you see is again, many of the recruitment processes will happen often before they graduate from high school. So they're still students. And so you will see those who are active in the movement who are still students or work, in college and those sorts of things. You will see individuals. I at one point was talking to an FBI agent who was talking about one of these groups in Georgia that had these individuals where they would do just enough work to pay for the latest armor, to pay for the latest rifle, to pay for the latest scope, whatever it is they needed, and then would focus on their training and their organization. So it's one of those, that is always the challenge. And I think it's again, if you're working, unless you're working for a company or an organization, you're getting paid by somebody who's part of your movement, it becomes very challenging. But that's one of the things, again, if we think back to the way we used to think about this in the 1990s, you would think, okay, there's nobody to work for. If you think about this today, we look at these organizations and they are particularly adept at knowing where their strengths are. So you will have some of these extremist groups that are great at raising money, some that are very good at recruiting, some that are particularly good at writing the propaganda and producing the propaganda for online, some that are purely the muscle. And what becomes different, as I said, is this is no longer the shaved heads and tattoos. It's no longer organizers who just look like me. They're individuals who are sitting next to you at church in three-piece suits. who are in your company who have figured out how to be a violent extremist on weekends and still show up at their kids' soccer games on a Tuesday night. And that becomes a little frightening when you realize what those potentials are. But I think the question you're raising is also important when you think about those who have exited and the formers and what they can do. And that's, one of the things that we'll often get is we get individuals who will reach out to us for help. You'll have some who have left this life behind even without having gone through a program like ours that are now working in some sort of job and are scared to death of getting doxxed, that somebody's going to find out about their past. You'll have individuals who have recently exited and for whatever reason recognize it may be hard to find a job when you have a swastika tattooed on your neck. And we can't help with that, but we can direct them to other nonprofits who can help with tattoo removals and those sorts of things. But it is a process. I mean, you do see, some of the formers will ultimately decide to go back to school, will decide they want to do the sorts of things that, the folks that have helped them get out did. You have a lot of formers that want to provide these sorts of services. When I talk about our exit specialists, those formers who are helping as peer counselors, all of them get paid. We can't pay them a lot, but I'm of the belief nobody works for free. And so they all do get paid for that, but they all also have to have other jobs in order to pay the rent.
I had a question.
Yes.
Patrick, could you tell us more about yourself? How did you end up getting into this work? I mean, it's such a unique and powerful kind of mission that you're on. How did you end up in the position that you're in?
It is very unique, and every so often I will get asked, I will try to remember how I got down this path myself. So I actually started off in politics, and then I moved into nonprofit work, and had worked in healthcare and largely in education. All of it around public engagement, all of it around social change. And so I was at that moment, I had just finished launching my third social enterprise and found out about Life After Hate. And I had never heard of them before. A lot of people have, a lot of people saw them on TV, particularly after Charlottesville. I had never heard of them. And it was one of those things that, one, it struck me that the mission was just so very, very important. And with all of the changes that they were going through, the fact that the organization had survived just shows you how important the mission was. Two, they were looking for someone who came with an experienced nonprofit hand, engagement hand, who could do the professionalize the organization as we have now. And so that was a challenge that I wanted to take. But three, it really was, I personally felt that there was no more important social issue that I could lend myself to. And it becomes very interesting because, I am the father of 2 Latino children. I can look back to the fall of 2016 when we were living right outside of Princeton, New Jersey, which you'd think would be a lovely bastion of liberal thinking. And a young man in elementary school came up to my daughter in his class and said, "I can't wait for Donald Trump to get elected so that he can force you to go build the wall and put you on the other side of the wall." That's something that doesn't leave you when you're realizing how do you raise children in a multiracial household. So that's something that hasn't left me. And it's one of those things I used to joke before Life After Hate came into my life that I sort of had the trifecta in that I went to the University of Virginia, Mr. Jefferson's university. He's not a very popular person right now in some sectors. One of my first jobs after college was I was press secretary for Senator Robert C. Byrd of West Virginia, who at the time was the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, but in his past was a former exalted cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. And once he had disavowed all of that, and the fact of the matter, I could always explain that at the time he had never met a person of color when he was a member of the KKK. And then before we left New Jersey, I spent 6 years working for the Woodrow Wilson Foundation in Princeton. Again, Woodrow Wilson, not a particularly popular dude these days. So that was the trifecta for me. It became interesting as I began working with formers and talking with those who were in the movement, in that I had to find points of connection. As I said, I'm the first person to lead this organization who is not a former extremist. That's not in my background. I can't talk about that. And it was very interesting where you find those points of connection. So, you know, I live now in South Carolina. Big help. If I were living in New York or New Jersey, that doesn't go very far. Having worked for an exalted Cyclops was a badge of honor that I could share with some of these individuals. So they appreciated that. And the third is one that I didn't realize that it didn't strike me until I was actually talking with one of our formers. And you know, I reflected on my own family. I have a grandmother who was born and raised in Germany. She was born in the forests of Bavaria and lived in the middle of nowhere. And ended up coming to the United States 5 years after my mother was born, after she had married an American GI who was over in Germany. And, you know, it's one of those that, as was required under law in Germany, my grandmother was a member of Hitler Youth. It was, you know, when she was alive, and I remember asking her about it once, very much equated it to the Girl Scouts. Which I think is how people in that generation have tried to accept it. Not realize, I mean, if you're 8 years old, it's hard to stand up against the Fuhrer. But it's being able to reference that becomes frighteningly and amazingly helpful. So that, you know, it's one of those, and we all try to find what can we pull from our backgrounds that are making the connections. And that's really where it comes down to. You know, when I work with formers, you know, they don't want to hear about the things that I've done professionally. They want to hear about these connections. You know, they want to see if there's anything we have in common that it's worth having a conversation. And I need to use every tool in my arsenal to find that. Yes, sir.
I would like to say something. I did some research on your organization, and I found something that was very interesting. You have a manual, I'm calling it a manual, of requirements, so that when a group member is in the process of helping a person trying to make change, he or she has this background. It's 12 pages long and very detailed, including needed knowledge, skills, attitudes, and knowing when to work in collaboration with the appropriate people of your multidisciplinary team. Can you please tell us how this was developed?
Sure. This is a document that we actually released last month. And it was an important and necessary document. As I said, the field that we work in is still very much the Wild West. And you will have individuals, particularly those that are working as peer advisors, who themselves are still grappling with their own issues. I think we've all seen, you know, you have this belief sometimes in the United States that any of us could become a teacher because we all went to school. The simple fact is most of us could not be effective teachers. We do not have the skill sets, we don't have the knowledge, we do not have the abilities. So in sitting down with one of my licensed psychologists, who's also our director of client services, that's where we came up with those KSIs. That's where we came up with that 12 pages. Because we needed to make clear, particularly as we look at other organizations and other work that's going on around the country, is that we have to make sure that the right people are doing this work. It is no longer enough, it's not sufficient to just want to mean well. You actually have to be trained and you have to have some preparation and some supports behind you. And so even for those peers that document is intended for, we are regularly providing within our organization the necessary professional development, the necessary skill building. It is constantly a work in progress. Because as I said, when you're dealing with those individuals who are now formers, you know, most of them do not hold college degrees. Many of them hold prison records. For many of them, working for us on an hourly basis is one of the first professional jobs they've ever had. And so that document becomes essential for us. This is one of those things that I believe with every ounce of my being that if we are going to be successful in this work, we have to make sure that we are holding not just ourselves, but the entire field to a standard that is necessary. So that's why that document was written. That's why we continue to work on ways that we can strengthen those KSIs. And I'm very proud to note that yesterday, in fact, the Department of Homeland Security, which provides funding to organizations like ours to work on domestic terrorism issues, released a document that all future organizations are going to, that are going to receive grants from them, are going to have to follow some of the standards and protocols that we put in place in the last 6 months.
I think this is a super important thing that you're talking about in the realm of human behavior, and that all organizations should have a modified version that meets their needs for something like this. I also want to say that I think that your organization is as successful as it is because, in my opinion, from the information I've gotten, that the people there, including yourself particularly, are able to make changes when necessary and not be resistant. And you're pliable, which is one of the most important things in dealing with human behavior. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that. I will say about 20 years ago, my wife taught me I had to break some of my own bad behaviors, and the phrase she continues to use with me 2 decades later is that I need to be positive and flexible. And it's one of those, over time, we continue. This is just very, very challenging work. And we've had to, in the last year, for 2023 actually, it's for this year's budget, we had to put in money to make sure that we are providing funds for our peer advisors to get whatever mental health services they need, because as they're working with individuals, sometimes they're getting triggered back to their past. We have to be able to deal with that. I made the decision, I am closing the organization for the first week of July as a restorative week, so that everybody on the team can take the time where they don't feel like they're missing something, they don't feel like they're checking on something, that we know you can take a time to focus just on yourself, because we all need that self-care. I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah, I'm concerned because hate is not a new subject. And there's thousands of years of experience training people to hate, maybe some experience training them to unhate, which is what you're doing. What I'm trying, because of the things I've been reading about, stuff like that, focuses on Germany and also prejudice in Eastern Europe. It's so hard. There's propaganda. How do you counter propaganda? And how? I saw a picture today of the leaders of the G7 at Hiroshima putting in flowers. How did we go from where they were in 45 to placing flowers at the grave sites of the 100,000 people who died when that bomb went off? Can you explain the process, how it goes?
Well, I can tell you, you are absolutely correct. I mean, we can look to the earliest pages of the New Testament. We had hate there. This is definitely not something new. And I will often get asked, what can we do to end hate in the world? And I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings. We can't.
Right.
Hate will always be there. What our organization is focused on is how do we make sure that that hate does not manifest itself into physical action. That becomes the first step. I think we can never change. And I've had, it's interesting. I've even had folks who have told me that, for instance, they'll say, racism has been banned in the United States since the 1960s. And I said, racism's still alive and well in the United States. Nothing banned racism. And we forget that we can't change the way people think. We can change the way they behave and the way that they act on those thinkings. And that's what that's what we are focused on. But you're right. This is something that you cut through propaganda, and I'm going to be very crass here. You cut through propaganda by producing your own propaganda. And that's one of the things that we are doing. You know, it's one of those, we are incredibly fortunate as a country. When I look at all of the organizations, these extremist groups, and the organization is being too kind to them. When I look at all of these extremist groups in the United States, both the small and the large, and you look at everything, I entered 2023 thinking their major focus was going to be on LGBTQ, and I was wrong. It's still anti-Semitism, and the ADL numbers show that. But at the end of the day, when you look at all of those organizations, we are incredibly fortunate as a society that these groups don't know how to organize themselves. If they were to figure out how to come together, how to unite, how to work together, then we're in real trouble. That then gives us our opportunity. Because what we see, this becomes like any other pyramid scheme. Those who are running these extremist groups are the ones that are benefiting. Those who are at the bottom, who are doing the work, who are causing the trouble, who are going to jail, they're getting nothing. And so over time, we need to keep reminding them that the promises that were made if they join this are not going to happen. You know, I don't mean to use some frightening language, but there's a story that was told to me about one of the groups that, it's not uncommon. As I said, every one of these organizations in the United States is rooted in anti-Semitism. And it was explained to me that these are groups that for the most part will say, the Holocaust never happened and we can't wait for it to happen again. It's all about speaking truth. It's all about putting forward our own propaganda, our own words, again, to make sure they don't act on it.
I have something I've thought about not mentioning. Hate. It's biblical. We are made to hate.
Mm-hmm.
It is in us to hate something. Mosquitoes, I don't know. Cold weather. But hate is a human. If you go back to creation and all of that, it was in our paperwork. Yeah, humans are going to hate things. So it's, like you said, you can't end it. You have to control it. What do you can't, it's still going to be there.
That's right. As I started off, I mean, hate can also be a powerful power for positive organizing. We often think, if you ask students, what is the opposite of love? Their answer is hate. The opposite of love is indifference. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we as a society are not indifferent about this sort of hate. There will always be haters. It's one of those, you'll have people saying, is this, all of a sudden, this has just exploded since Charlottesville. We've had this massive increase in violent far-right extremism and people thinking this way. No, we haven't. We've simply decided as a society that it's now perfectly okay to be public about it. We've always held these beliefs. As a nation, we've always held anti-Semitic beliefs. We've always held misogynistic beliefs. We've always held racist beliefs. It's part of our DNA as the United States. It's how do we make sure that the majority of us who don't hold those views are the ones that are deciding what defines our society.
This will be the last question.
So this is a big opportunity. You keep on going back to anti-Semitism, and that means it's a European-based culture. But the people who hate Asians, were poorly treated there, you know that on the West Coast. So that wasn't based on anti-Semitism. What was just based on, what do you call it, racial? It wasn't anti-Semitism.
It's not anti-Semitism, no. I mean, anti-Semitism is just one of the flavors of hate. Anti-Asian, you're right, is absolutely another one of them. What you have, though, is when you look at the foundations of all of these hate groups in the United States, they're all founded on the belief that's not that dissimilar to what you saw in Europe in the 1930s, that the only people that are worthy of power and privilege are those who are white and male and of European descent. So everybody else needs to step aside. And even you look at a group like the Proud Boys that has had a Latino as its head until they get more power, and then they're going to step him aside.
But I think that what you're doing is very, very specific. And you get so much information that little by little you can be better and better at doing what you do. And I think that's absolutely important, that you don't try to grab every string that's focus.
We can't deal with every string. You're absolutely right. And the one thing that we can do that we've really doubled down on in the last year is what you're talking about. It is the notion of collecting data and information. And you need that in order to do more than just good, in order to have true positive impact. We need to know it.
For a very specific purpose, taking people who have a viewpoint and hoping that you can somehow, to some of them, make a significant change that's important to society.
I can tell you that if somebody wants to leave a life of violent far-right extremism behind, if they are willing to put the work in, we can help them do so. We can help them become positive members of society today. It requires work on both sides, but if somebody's willing to put in that work, we can help them get to that destination. You're absolutely correct.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you. I just want to thank all of you, and for all of you who are joining us or seeing this and listening to this online after the fact, thank you for your support and for being part of this. We have been slowly picking up our programming. If you haven't noticed, next weekend also is a busy week for us. Next Friday at 7 p.m. we have a joint event with the Teaneck Creek Conservancy in a celebration of the reopening of the park across the parking lot. It's really beautiful out there if you haven't been out there. But we have a outdoor jazz concert at 7 p.m. With Art Lillard and the Swing Sextet. They're really fun, and that should be a fantastic event. And then on Saturday, we have Mr. Tony Jackson, who will be coming here to perform a hip-hop performance. He is a poet, but he also does music. So he will be here next Saturday. So please come back and join us. And thank you so much. Have a safe and great night. And yeah, thank you.